Zahan, it's awesome to have you on the podcast here. You're probably the closest person I have recorded video. We're not that far. We're probably less than 200 miles away via the crow flies. We got a big mountain range in the middle, but it's awesome for you to make some time and jump on the Coldfear podcast. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, right on, Aaron. Stoked to be here. Stoked to chat with you and chat with another Wyomingite.
Yeah, exactly. I know. You and Kelly Halpin are the only other Wyoming people I've had on. I don't know if you know Kelly
Okay.
very well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, she's
Yeah,
amazing.
she's kind of the Jackson badass over there for running the mountains. So,
Yeah.
let's kind of jump into it a little bit. Zahan, kind of give me a little background of how you got into playing around in the mountains there in Jackson Hole.
Well, for me, it all started in my childhood. I grew up in Switzerland, and my dad, but both my mom and dad, came from India and emigrated to Switzerland. And my dad particularly just loved the mountains. He loved them from a distance. He wasn't skilled in terms of being able to climb and ski and do all the things that we love to do, but he was fascinated by them. He loved photography, loved going for hikes. So we just had a lot of exposure to the mountains as kids, just a place to go play and explore and hang out as a family. And the Alps are very dramatic, so wherever you're standing, you're always looking out at these insane landscapes. And my mind used to go wild as a child, like looking out at these snow-covered peaks and rime-covered rock faces. And you know, mountain sports are so much more a part of everyday culture in Europe. In a sense, they feel more accessible because of that. They're on television, they're in the magazines. So I already started to understand that people played in them in these different ways. And I can't really say what it was, but just from a very early age, like I just really like yearned to experience what it would be like to be up there. My mind used to
And
go wild.
do you think it's like a cultural thing there too? Like it's almost like the mountains are part of culture there, whereas here mountains are not part of any really culture. I mean, if you grew up in Jackson or something, for sure, it's part of the culture there. But amongst most of the U.S., it's not even people don't really think about it.
Yeah, that's certainly fair to say. Absolutely. Yeah,
And how
just
old
much
were
more
you?
woven.
Yeah, totally. How old were you when you were living there?
Oh, from my earliest memories, I was born in London, but we moved to Switzerland and France when I was probably about 4 or 5.
Okay,
Hmm.
yeah. So
So
you were fully immersed.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Nice. And then when did you move to the U.S.?
I moved to the U.S. Late '90s for college,
Oh, okay.
and I graduated from an international school. I'd been pursuing my passion in the mountains with a couple of friends, but I knew that I didn't really have a future educationally in Switzerland. It's a very like narrow track approach to education. I had no idea what I wanted to study, and so liberal arts seemed like a better way to go. And so I went to school on the East Coast near Boston, and kind of got plugged into the New England scene, a lot of bouldering, a little bit of ice climbing, um, some backcountry skiing. Yep, and just yeah, that was kind of my next chapter.
And where did you go to school in the U.S.?
I went to school, the small liberal arts school called Gordon College on the North Shore of Boston.
Oh, okay. Interesting. And there was not, I mean, there's not a ton. What is it? Trying to think the mountain range there. It's not the Adirondacks or anything. What's there?
I mostly played in the Whites, in the White
Okay.
Mountains in New Hampshire. That was probably the easiest access, but the mountain sport, if you will, that was like most accessible to where I was going to school. And then I ended up teaching high school there, so we lived there for quite a few years. It was just like hard granite bouldering, a lot of
Oh, yeah.
really good granite bouldering. So did a fair bit of that, fair bit of sport climbing.
And when you went to college, came from Switzerland there, were you already skiing and climbing at a high level, or how would you have rated yourself then?
I wouldn't say really at a high level, but I
Okay.
definitely was very passionate. I was very interested. And In a lot of ways in Switzerland, you should have like the ideal entry into the mountains because, for one, you've got all this infrastructure that just plops you right in the middle of the mountains, right? You've got lift access to really high alpine terrain in a way that we don't really have in the US. And you also have all these alpine clubs that make it very easy for kids
Oh
to
yeah.
get into the mountains. But those were all, very much designed for white kids, to be blunt.
Yeah.
And as a brown kid, I was definitely not going to go join the Swiss Alpine Club and go traipsing around the mountains as the only kid of color. So
Yeah.
even though it was like very close, and I was very close to having access to like mentors and educators and guides and different things that you would have had if you were in the Alpine Club, I really didn't. So my approach was like just go figure it out by yourself. And in an environment where you have such good access and so little education, it's pretty gnarly setup actually,
I
right?
was gonna
Because you get
say,
into yeah,
yeah, you can get yourself in a really bad situation very quickly and easily.
I did, yep, multiple times.
Interesting.
Because I was very like dog on a bone, just like when I saw the mountains, I was just like full force, go forward, make it happen, figure it out, and that was tricky.
Yeah, I've noticed that just from far away. I mean, you and I've never met in person, but just from far away, like you're very passionate about what you do, and you're not just passionate. I think what I've seen is about actually just doing it, but you're also passionate about the science behind it and learning and educating yourself, which you don't really necessarily see in everybody that kind of pursues a sport. Um, is that just kind of how you've always been?
Yeah, I don't know where that comes from. Yeah, I mean, certainly when it comes to training, I often say like it's like we're all born with a Ferrari, but nobody gave us the keys. That's like how I see it. That we're all have this incredible potential, but if you don't know how to train, if you don't know how to like manipulate the variables, you're never going to achieve what your body's capable of. You're going to be stuck in the cycle of injury and setbacks, plateaus. And for me, at a very early age, I realized, like early age, I mean like in my 20s, I started realizing like, whoa, I'm capable of way more if I train. And I hired this
Hmm.
coach, um, and he's still a friend of mine, Dan Struble. He was a Nordic competitor, very, very elite masters Nordic competitor. And so he started structuring my training. And right away, you just saw these massive improvements. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's crazy. I didn't know my body was capable of that, let
Huh.
alone capable of it with just a couple of months of training. And so I think from certainly like a training point of view, that's where that curiosity came from to better understand the science of what moves the needle on performance. And that, as I said, that happened before Alyosha was born, who's now 20, my older son. And so it's been a couple decades.
Wow. So was that like early 20s when that kind of light came on? Is that and were you in Jackson then? What I guess yeah, when did you move to Jackson?
I moved to Jackson, let's see, I think it was '03
In
that
oh
my
03.
wife Kim and I moved to Jackson. Um, and at first, I was all about just like going to ski the biggest, gnarliest things I could find, which wasn't all that gnarly. I was still very new to it, but I was very, like you said, passionate and hungry for it. And
Yeah.
then we got pregnant with our first child, and that really made me take a step back. I lost my edge, if you will. I wasn't like as comfortable just like marching forward all the time. And, I started to become increasingly more aware of how things can go wrong. And so for a few years, that kind of forced me a little bit out of ski mountaineering and more into competitive racing. So I got really into skimo and randonnée
Oh.
racing and competing and all that type of stuff. And that's really where the light flipped, or the light switch flipped on in my head as far as the impact of training came. And that
Okay.
was, yeah, it was in my early to mid 20s.
Okay. And so what brought you to Jackson? What was the lead for that?
Childhood
Like
dreams, man. It was
just
just
to go
like
live
what
in
I
Jackson
always,
and
yeah, always. Ever since I was a kid growing up in Switzerland, I used to cut out these pages of Powder magazine and I'd pin them up on my wall, and my whole like next to my pillow where I slept was just like plastered with all these images. And for whatever reason, the environment, like the whole like style of skiing and approaching the mountains that was characterized about Jackson, I was like, yeah, that's what I want. That's where I want to go. So it's
Did
just
you move
always
there?
there.
Yeah. Did you move there and have a job already lined up, or is just kind of like, hey, we're going, we're gonna figure it out?
No, yeah, fully figured out. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was in my 20s. We didn't have kids. We lived in the
Yeah.
back of our truck. It was, I think it was the summer of '02, if I remember right. I finished working construction on the East Coast. Kim and I went to like the discount food store. We bought hundreds of cans of vegetables and whatever canned food we could get, and we mounted a wooden rack on the top of our pickup truck with two Thule boxes, and we
Oh
filled
my
one of
god.
them with cans of food and like tortillas, and then the other one with climbing gear, and we just loaded up and very very slowly drove to across the country to Jackson, and just
Wow.
lived off the little bit of savings and canned food for a couple of months.
Oh my
It
god.
was the
And
best.
so your wife was is what was your wife's name again?
Kim.
Kimberly, Kim.
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
she was climbing with you at the time and skiing and kind of doing everything as well.
Yeah, mostly climbing. I
Okay.
think she most had the bug for climbing. The skiing aspect was maybe more foreign, less intuitive, and yeah, she was less psyched on that, but she was into it to some degree. But the climbing really appealed to her.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So we moved
And
out, and it was summertime, so it was mostly like a climbing season that we came out for
yeah.
initially.
And then at what point did you start guiding?
It was a few years.
It
It
was
was
okay.
definitely a few years. Yeah. Um, I can't say exactly when, maybe oh 04, oh 05, something like that. But I knew that I wanted to be a guide. That was the dream all along, even since I was a little kid.
Huh.
And I'd had this experience when I graduated from high school where all my friends went to Greece to party. And my parents were like, nah, that's a waste of money. We're not going to pay for that. But we know that you really are into this climbing thing. So we'll hire a guide and we'll spend that money to, get you a little bit more educated because you've been trying to kill yourself for a couple of years. So how about you go out with a guide? So I was like, done deal. That sounds great. And by the luck of the draw, I ended up getting this legendary French guide whose name is Christophe Profi, who was, one of the greatest climbers of his generation. He just come back from K2. He was on the front of the magazines. He was just like an icon of Chamonix climbing. And I went out with him, and it just blew my mind because I was used to the mountains equal epics. And for him, going out with him, it was like, oh my gosh, everything just runs so smoothly. There's no epics, and we can get done whatever we want to get done. Like, it was just easy. And so it really kind of like flipped the switch, like, oh, there's this whole nother level of skill and ability and understanding, ability to really like connect and interpret the mountains that you don't even understand yet. But I got exposed to it by going out with Christoph, and that really kind of flipped the switch to like, okay, someday I'll be a guide. And I knew that the very first thing I needed to do was just rack up a lot more of my own experience, put more time in. And that's really what drove me to come out to Jackson. It was just a place where I could completely immerse myself in being a student of the mountains that had been a part of my like dream since I was a little kid.
And was so that was kind of getting out with him, and then were you able to like climb with some people that were mentoring you as you kind of went up, or were you still just kind of like just getting out wherever you could and learning as you could?
It was more of that. Yeah, just
Yeah.
learning as I could. Partners, a lot of failing, a lot of mishaps, accidents, even none serious, but getting stranded overnight in the mountains and all that type of stuff was a huge part of my teenage years. Then when I came to the East Coast and I went to college, I actually met people who had far less experience in terms of like being in the Alps and climbing big routes and things like that, but were far more skilled than I was. They actually
Okay.
had like pretty dialed rope systems, and um, they understood how to read the avalanche forecast and different things like that that were not really a part of my repertoire. My repertoire
Mm.
was just like grit and risk tolerance. So
Yeah.
that was great. I had this one particular friend, Jimmy Bevel, who um, really kind of showed me the ropes and kind of had to slow me down, be like, no, 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 you're not even ready for that. Like, slow down. We start here. We like this, and so
Yeah.
that was great. And the 4 years of college definitely kind of helped me build a little bit more of a foundation in a lot of the areas that I was really missing. And the New England scene of, I mean, ice climbing in particular, right, is incredibly, the skill level is very, very high. I mean, there's
Yeah.
legendary alpinists who live in the vicinity of where I went to school and taught. So that was pretty cool because, you look at the whites and you look at the ranges in the East Coast, you think, God, this is nothing, like piddly stuff compared to where I was from, where it's so dramatic, big, in
Yeah.
your face, huge vertical relief, steep. And yet for me it was like very humbling because I was like, oh my gosh, these guys like climb way harder than I do, they're way fitter than I am, they're way more dialed, and this is the environment they've honed their skills in. So like, obviously I got a lot to learn because
Yeah.
I come from this grandiose place, but I don't really know shit.
Yeah, like that was their comfort. It's funny. I went to Alaska to ski last year. I went to Alaska for a month. Drove out Thompson Pass and got to hang out with a buddy of mine. Had been there a few times, so I kind of got into the core crew out there very quickly, which was incredibly intimidating. And I mean, I've skied a bunch, but I've never skied Alaska. I mean, and that was to me was like this is legit. And I remember going up spines and things like that, and I was like totally chill. I'm like, this is freaking great. Like, I'm comfortable. And some of those skiers that are badass skiers are like, dude, this is fucking sketchy. And I'm like, really? This is great. Like, I don't want to go down. Like, I can't wait to
Right.
go down. And I'm like, I don't even want to put the skis on, man. It's like, but it was really weird to see where my comfortness was not where theirs was. But as soon as the skis were on, man, it was like just a switch, just flipped for them. And it was game on, and I was just the absolute opposite. Like I'm in survival mode right now. Like I don't know how I'm gonna get down here, And they obviously those types of guys just really enjoyed making me uncomfortable very quickly. And I learned a ton. It was an awesome trip. But it seeing that like, all right, this is where I need to feel like if you really want to ski stuff like this is you're gonna have to figure out how to get comfortable in this. And unfortunately, I mean, I don't know what your opinion is, but the only way to do it is to like gradually put yourself in those situations, and you just start to gain the skill set, and the comfortness kind of comes with routine and getting out, not necessarily scaring yourself all the time, but like being with the right people, yet, or looking out for your safety as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, backcountry skiing is like quite a multi-dimensional sport. It's like multiple sports in one, right? Because it's this very endurance-based sport at first, right? It's
Yep.
the walking uphill, and so you're covering enormous amounts of ground, a lot of vertical. You've got a lot of overhead hazard. You got to understand a very, very dynamic environment, similar to ice climbing. And then you flip the switch, you put the skis on, and now all of a sudden it's about this athletic movement of, you know, rolling with gravity downhill. So it just really depends, I think, where people come from. So similar to you, I kind of came to it from more like an alpinist mindset.
Mm.
So I was fit. I was overall pretty comfortable climbing around on steep terrain. But then my skiing skills weren't at that same level. So I really had to develop the ability to make turns in precarious places, handle all of the weird backcountry snow that you do, throughout a Teton season of breakable crust and windboard and pow and corn, and just get that comfort. But other people, especially nowadays, a lot of high level backcountry skiers are coming from a background in ski racing or free ride. So they're like, athletic skills are off the charts. Maybe their endurance isn't there, or maybe their understanding of the environment isn't there, you know?
Yeah. And
So it kind of
I feel like,
depends.
yeah, like Jackson is one of those places where I could see that you can't just be a great skier. Like you've also got to be a good alpine climber as well, to be comfortable, but also to be successful in those mountains. Like you just can't be a great skier just because of, I don't know. It seems like getting to a lot of the stuff involves having some alpine skills and really just more true mountain skills.
Yeah, I think so. That's certainly true to a degree, though I think that like the level of alpinism that you need to climb 99% of what we ski is still pretty low.
Yeah.
Whereas the level of skiing that you need to like safely navigate on the way down is probably pretty high.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I
I
could see
think
that.
to your point about the mountain skills, it's really so much of surviving a long life in the mountains, right? Is about like your ability to observe and interpret the environment and to
Yeah.
be able to listen. Like the mountains are talking, but do you speak the language? Do you
Yeah.
know how to interpret the wind? Do you know
Yeah.
what it means that there's a crust here and it's dry snow over there? What are the implications of that from a point of view of stability and all these different things? So
Yeah.
certainly that is maybe like the longest journey that we all have, is not the
Yeah.
athletic aspect of ripping turns or swinging tools on what's maybe what WI3 ice is about as hard as it gets to access the top of the peaks. It's not that
Yeah.
hard, but then being able to decide when is the right time to be here, that's actually a lifelong pursuit, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's the one you can't teach the youngins. Um,
yeah.
yeah, that's when we'll get
And
into that.
and I mean, forget the youngins. I've made plenty of mistakes in the latter part of my career, and I've been doing this for 20 years, so can hardly teach
Yeah.
myself.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's I've Dwight and I've actually sat down and talked about that. It's like as soon as you feel like you've stopped learning, then that's probably the time you should actually just hang up the tools. That's like if you don't feel like you're learning anything anymore, and you feel like you know it all, then that's your time. Walk away. Um, I'm curious for you. So, at what point did you start getting connected in with TGR and some of that crew? Because that's really kind of I feel like at least I knew of you before you started doing stuff with TGR, but then TGR is kind of where I feel like you started kind of making a name for yourself. And I don't know. I think maybe it's because you were like you could see you in films in action, putting your guide hat on, but also hanging with the big guys as well. Like when did all that kind of stuff start to happen for you?
Yeah, that stuff. Oh, I don't know. I would say that's probably around like somewhere between 2010, 2013 to 2015 in that time frame. And you're absolutely right. Like that definitely gave me so much exposure. People started to know who I was. And that was really, really helpful for me as a young guide, because guiding was still a pretty meager career in 2010 and 2015. It's not like it is today where a lot of people can make a living as a guide. There's enough work to go around. Back then, there really was very little, I would say, comparatively. There were only a handful of guides who worked through the wintertime. So for me, as a young and less experienced than many of the more seasoned guides, it was very, very helpful to my career to be put on the big screen and shown as somebody who had those skills. And then, the phone definitely started to ring off the hook.
Yeah. And did you go to other places with that crew, or were you mostly kind of like the expert in the Tetons?
I was, I did travel some with TGR. We did some like foot power trips and other places in BC, and places like that. Where I really liked to get involved with them was when it was a foot powered mission where I was a part of the team. Because a lot of what TGR needs for like shooting free ride is to just have like a guide in the helicopter, gets out, digs a pit, makes an
Hmm.
assessment, and then stays in the helicopter, maybe with the cameraman, this, that, the other. For one, I wasn't really interested in that kind of riding. I wasn't interested in that kind of work. I wanted to be in the snow, and my whole career had been about being in the snow. Like my ability to make decisions is really just only sharp if I'm immersed in it. So I think that's what they kind of saw me more for. And at that time, I think that the ski industry was making a bit of a transition from being more like free ride, heli, top down type of pure adrenaline focused riding to more adventure style riding where how you get there mattered, and then maybe you're making first descent, maybe you're connecting discontinuous terrain. It's more adventurous style,
Hmm.
ski mountaineering kind of thing. And
Yeah.
prior to that, prior to about 2010, it was like, I think it's pretty fair to say it was pretty unheard of to see that type of skiing in mainstream media. But then Jeremy was the one that changed that when he started his trilogy, Deeper, Further, Higher. And he was kind of making that transition from being like the pinnacle of the sport as far as freeride to starting POW and thinking, hey, this can't be the future of our sport. I can't
Yeah.
be leading the future of our sport from a helicopter. Like I that doesn't jive with my values anymore. I'm going to be a foot powered athlete. And so now I need to learn a whole new skill set, which is kind of back to what we were talking about
Yeah.
learning the uphill, learning to read the mountains, and he did all those different trips all over the world, developing those skills. And when I came in was to film Higher, which was the third, like the final
Yeah.
film in a series. And I think that really massively accelerated the interest in human powered skiing and snowboarding um, around the world, really.
Yeah. Do you feel like is that still like a passion of yours to go and chase stuff that hasn't been skied and things like that and human powered stuff or
Yeah, I mean, I would probably word it a little bit differently than I would have 10 years ago. I am unquestionably more cautious than I was at that point in my career where I did feel somewhat invincible. I would never have said that. It would never have been words I would have spoken, but like I think I had accumulated enough positive experiences and few negative experiences that I thought I must have this pretty wired.
yeah.
I must be really good at this. And then, as you just mentioned, that all kind of comes crashing down, and eventually things go wrong. And I had a series of accidents, or I didn't necessarily have a series of accidents, but friends of mine did, and I was involved in one of them. Um, but many friends died during a 5 year period. In fact, all of my partners died. To be
Wow.
to be
And
honest, really, all of my partners just were gone within the space of 5 years. And yeah. Anyway, yeah.
yeah, and well, and I was gonna say, I mean, I think that is a great opening for people listening. There's it's out on YouTube, Solving for Z, um, is one of the better films I've seen in a very long time, and I think it tells your story really, really well. But it also puts a lot of questions out there about what we do in the mountains, why we do it, et cetera, and how in that film there was, you talk about losing some friends, and then I believe there was a specific accident that you were in that seemed to me from I'm trying to remember the film, but like it led up, and then that accident happened, and maybe that was like the full trigger pull for you to be like, well, what am I like? You're questioning everything now. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but can you kind of talk through what was it that last experience or was it things that led up to it and that was the final straw, or do I have it completely wrong?
No, you don't have it completely wrong by any means. That's I mean, there was no like final straw or singular thing. There were just a number of accidents. Starting in about 2010, um, I lost my closest friend Ray Landon to an avalanche on the South Teton, and it was maybe the sixth, eighth track on the slope, and it fractured, and he got washed off an 800-foot cliff. And at that time, Ray wasn't just my best friend; he was really my only friend who I could just do everything with in the mountains because we had
Oh,
kind of grown up together in a way as far as our skills and our ambitions and what we wanted to do. We were both like really into training and fitness. So it just ended up being this like perfect alignment that any
uh,
mountain athlete knows. Like when you have that, it's like, wow, that's gold. You have those partners that just are like, you don't even have to say anything. You're just on the same
yep.
page. And so when Ray died, it was a massive, massive setback, and it was also the first time that I was really faced with the reality of it as opposed to the theory of it. And yeah, it was crushing. And then it was only I think it was 2 years later that Steve Romeo died. And Steve was a very renowned skier who started this website called Teton AT, which at the time we were like, oh, that's a nice little blog. And you think about it now,
Yep.
15 years later, and it's like, no, that was literally the beginning of a whole new era of Teton skiing. Anyway, Steve dying, I was not involved in that accident. I wasn't there for it. I wasn't there for Ray's either. But that one also had a huge impact on me. And that happened when I was working full time. And I had been waiting since, we talked about like my teenage years to make the step to being a full time guide. And I was guiding through that time, but it was part time. piecing different jobs together. And when Steve died, that really like it hit me hard in the sense of me thinking like if there's something that you've always wanted to do, then you better not delay it that much longer because you're seeing how short life can be and how uncertain it can be. So that was like definitely a pivotal moment. Um, and then in 2015, I had an accident that I was involved with three friends, one of whom survived. The other two died that day. Obviously, pivotal, extremely difficult, and a moment that really made me question because they were both dads as well.
And were
So
you
I
a dad
kind
at
of
that
got
time?
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. My kids are old.
Oh
My
yeah, your
kids are
kid.
like
Yeah.
17 and 20. So
Oh yeah, that's right.
that's another thing that's maybe unique about kind of my career is I had kids through my entire career. I had
Mm,
kids from before I was anybody in the mountains. I was always a dad before I became, you know,
okay,
um,
got it.
a guide or any of those things.
Yeah,
Um,
interesting.
yeah.
And
So,
so, did you feel? And I'm speaking for myself a little bit here, but I felt like, did you feel the connection to them and the responsibility change as they got older, or did that change for you at all as they grew up?
um, it's complicated, man. It's hard to like put it into. It's
I just
it
know for
ebbed and
me,
flowed.
yeah, like for me, it was when she was younger, and I think there was less personality there, less connection, and like there's a real human. And like as she became more of an adult and in her teens, like the connection was so much stronger, and then my responsibility felt that much greater. Versus when she was really young, I think I could still separate it in my head. Like when I would go out, I could separate myself from it. But as she's gotten older, I just I can't separate it as well anymore. And maybe that's partly that and partly age. But I was just curious.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, in a lot of ways, I would almost say I might have felt a little bit the opposite, where
Oh yeah,
when they're young, they're so dependent on you, and like a baby would literally die if you didn't feed it.
yeah,
Whereas as they get older, they gain independence, and so maybe that sense of like I have to show up in that way every single day is a little bit lower. But
yeah,
then it's overlaid by all the experiences that you have and the setbacks and different things. So it's hard for me to say that there was sort of one clear linear sort of trajectory in my risk that was related to my kids. It was just like always a thing. It was always the presence of my kids, my responsibility as a dad has always been one of the marbles I've had to kind of juggle and consider.
yeah.
Yeah.
So kind of going back to risk tolerance, obviously going through a lot of things there. Like what's going through your head? I mean, obviously people around you are dying, good friends. Um, what like are you just telling yourself like, hey, I'm just getting lucky here, or I'm making better decision? Like what's going through your head at that time?
Each loss was different, right? Like because Ray and I had a certain type of relationship about risk, and I was always the more cautious one there. So when he died, there was a certain sense of like, well, Ray was sendier than I was. He was bolder than I was.
Mm,
So, you know, there was a little bit of a logic to it that like the year that he died was a very bad snow season where we had very low snow, and as a result, we had long, persistent weak layers and pretty lame skiing. Like the quality wasn't that good. And for me, I was probably going to be satisfied waiting till the spring before going into the high peaks. But Ray he had this next level hunger, appetite for it, and so he was like first to be like, I think it's good to go. I think, and ultimately, he was killed by a persistent slab avalanche. So that kind of contributed to the way I processed that one. Then when Steve died, Steve had this very intuitive relationship with the mountains. Steve was all about the feeling. He was not about any kind of snow science. And at
oh
that
really?
time, I was particularly interested in the science. I was becoming a guide I was a guide and I was evolving in my guiding. So I was very plugged into like, what's the latest and the greatest understanding of snow? Whereas Steve was like, no, no, no. It's just like, how does it feel? And he was very good at that. I mean, not to undermine that because the volume of exposure that he had had to snow was enormous. So his
Mm,
ability to interpret it was very good. But it was very difficult to communicate it because it was very much like a trust me, this is how I feel type of thing.
yep.
Whereas I was learning the language of avalanche science. So I was like, well, the strength this, the propagation that. And so, there was a difference there in the way that we approached it. So I think when he died, that was part of the process of me feeling like, okay, then I've got to double down on the things that I already do because it seems like those are things that are keeping me alive. I got to get more scientific. I got to really dive in and make sure that I'm up to speed.
Hmm.
Then Stephen and Luke, there's a very, very different situation with a very small, wet, loose avalanche. It wasn't an avalanche that would bury you, but it would knock you off your feet. And if you're on the front points of your crampons in very steep terrain and you've got an icefall bulge thing below you, then you don't need to get buried. You can, you know, die in other
Yeah.
ways. So that also was a very unique avalanche. That one happened in late May.
Yeah. And like in that one, like thinking through that for in your own mind, that wasn't the one you weren't with them in that one, or you were?
I was with him in
Oh,
that one,
oh,
yeah.
that's right. You were on the side, if I remember right, in the movie or something. Yeah. Um, and what? Yeah. What? So, I mean, God, that one would have been. I can't even imagine going through that. But after that was then you got caught in another avalanche. Is that right?
I
Or am I?
mean, yeah, many, many years later, I think
Okay,
you're
that was many.
referring to, yeah, yeah, you're
Okay.
referring to the accident that happened in 2020.
Okay.
Um, yep, many, many years, or not that, 5, 6 years later. Yeah,
So did anything change for you from that moment with your other buddies, and then that moment in the avalanche? I mean, were you already starting to kind of like question some of the things that you were doing and decisions and objectives at all, or?
absolutely. Like, people who know me know that, like, I've always been questioning. And the older I've gotten, the lower my confidence. I'm never the one who's like, come on, guys, like, it's good to go. Like, trying to drive the train forward. I'm usually the one like the skeptic. I'm the one who's second guessing. And I mean, in prime conditions, right? Obviously, if it's windboard, it can be much more straightforward. But I think that all of those experiences cumulatively have just undermined that youthful sense of confidence that you enter the mountains with in your 20s. That's awesome. I miss those days, but they're hard to
Yeah.
survive because that confidence is dangerous. But
Yeah, that's the more time you spend in the mountains, the more experience you gain, and the more you realize how many things are actually trying to kill you. And you
yeah,
start to also realize, I think when I was young, I was like, oh, I mean, everything's in my control. Like, like, I mean, and then you start to realize, well, actually, you don't control a whole lot. Like, yes, there is some pieces, but there's still too many other variables out there that you do not control. Um, and I think, unfortunately, the only way to figure that out is to do it, and age creates a bit of a balance within that, I think. I remember that I like just climbing skinny pillars and pillars in general. I always kind of like, I'd never had any issues. And I've,
mm,
climbed the South Fork since the, mid late 90s, and climbed skinnier and skinnier stuff and got away with it until one day I didn't get away with it and got really, really lucky. And then I remember literally 2 days later, a hanging dagger fell as I was underneath it. Um, I got really lucky, was able to scamper off and get away. And I was like, God, I wonder if something's like speaking to me here, like these are two instances within 48 hours where I've nearly died. Maybe I've gotten away with a lot, and so I now those experiences and other people, same as you, people passing away, it just made me realize, like, man, I don't like I can control some stuff, but there's a lot of things that I can't control that are going to kill me, and I still struggle with that and the balance of it when you're outside, and when to do it and when to not to do it, and I think ice climbing, especially when you get to like the scarier pillars and things like that, is I think a lot like forecasting an avalanche. Like, you could ski and it'd be great, you know, um, and it may not even be that hard to ski. but then the next guy goes and it kills them, and that's the same way these pillars can be. But I don't think that a lot of ice climbers really think about it that way. Um, and so it's just like trying to understand like the mental piece that goes into that, and just like the experience that goes in. I mean, years and years, and I mean, I'm sure the amount of days in the mountains you have is ridiculous, um, and you can't teach that in a book, you know.
I had this experience a couple years ago. A friend of mine, Cole Christensen, invited me to go to Hawaii after my accident. He had actually had an accident around the same time. He saw the film and he was like, "Oh man, I'd love to connect." So we went to Hawaii, and he was like, "Yeah, you can come. You can learn to surf. I've always wanted to learn to surf." So we got in the water, and in my mind, surfing was about the athletic thing of like you pop up on the board and you turn and you ride the wave, right? So I look at I'm sitting there on the board looking out at the ocean, and I'm like, okay, I got to figure out how I can pop up and ride this thing. And so I'm asking him all these questions about that. And he's like, no, you got it all wrong. Forget that. Just worry about the environment. Just become a student of the ocean. Notice the patterns. See when the waves come. See where they break. See which waves break in the direction pattern that you want.
Hmm.
All these different observations of the natural world. And it really completely blew my mind because I was so focused on the athleticism of the thing, the sport. And coming back and thinking about it in terms of the mountains, it's like that makes so much sense. And it's really informed the way I travel in the mountains, where like, we're so obsessed naturally, I think, with doing our sport in the mountains that sometimes we forget that it's actually being an astute observer of the natural world. That's the foundation for the whole damn thing. Like if I came ice climbing with you, your ability to read like which pillar and when would be the right timing for that pillar, and what the evidence from the last few days tells you about the stability of that pillar. You and I'd be looking at the same pillar, and you'd have all of this information and observations that gave you this whole higher level of ability to interpret this invisible thing, which is the pillar going to stay put or is it going to fall down, that I just wouldn't have, right? And that's what all of our, so many of these sports, like surfing, like big mountain skiing, like ice climbing and alpinism, have in common is that ultimately, in my mind, when you boil it down, it's just like, how in tune are you with the natural world that you want to play in? How able are you to interpret the things that it's saying to you so that you can like cooperate with it rather than be there at a time when it's screaming, hey, this is not the time to do X, Y, or
Yeah,
Z.
that's a. I've never heard it put that way, and I love it, because it's less. I think so many people are objective oriented. Right,
Yeah,
it's in. Let's go. Or whatever it
yeah,
might be. Versus, is the environment good for being here? Is like, like, what is it? You're listening to the mountain much more and taking in all the observations that are there, versus just like, let's just go do it. And I think I've always been like that. Like, it's my father kind of instilled this to me in hunting. Actually, it was like we would go out and we go wander in the mountains. He hated being around people, so we just go wander around. And many of the days we would like going bird hunting. We would never even shoot our gun. And I was like, Dad, why do we keep coming? He's like, it's about being out here. Like, it's not about actually, going and shooting something. It's really more about, we're out here, we're experiencing the mountains, and we're learning the mountains as we're traveling through them. Like, it's not about shooting the gun or taking something home. And that was something I don't think I realized until I was probably in one of my mid 20s. I was like, oh, my dad wasn't that. He actually knew what he was talking about. And it's kind of the same thing of what you're saying. It's like, it's learning how, and I think it's one of the things that's really intimidating for me about going to new mountain ranges is I don't I don't know what's happened in the past. I don't know what it was here 2 days ago. I don't know the history of walking down this canyon and blah blah blah. And I think that is really intimidating for me, when I go to new places. So, yeah, I love the way you put that. Sorry, I went on a roll there, but
no, I love
um,
that. I love the hunting kind of framework because I don't hunt, but maybe in the future I will. But I imagine that is just the perfect environment for cultivating that. that curiosity, and I call it a naturalist's mindset, you know, of
Yep.
because it there's no substitute. Doesn't matter how strong your legs are, how many pounds you can hike out. If you can't read the signs, perhaps the tracks, the sounds, all of the different clues that the animals are leaving, you'll never be in the right place in the first place, right? So you have to
Yeah.
have that ability to tune in. And, you know, one of the things that I enjoy the most is I teach this course called the Big Mountain Snow Safety Course. And we only do it once a year now because it's exhausting and just a huge lift. But we teach our system for how we navigate the mountains. And I break it down to 3 steps. And maybe this resonates with you as a climber and maybe as a hunter is observe, interpret, decide. And what I find is that most people go straight to decide. We all want to decide. It's what you said, right? It's that we're objective focused. So the conversation starts, hey, Aaron, do you want to go climb the XYZ pillar? And what I've learned and what I try to teach is that's the wrong place to start. That's starting with the end. Like the right place to start is what do you notice about what's going on in the mountains without even ascribing any meaning to it or any implications from it? Well, the winds, we started the conversation with you saying that the winds in Cook City have just been astronomically high. There's an observation. You don't need to be a high level practitioner to notice that the winds are absolutely ripping. You could be there and it could be windy. You could notice that the trees have had all the snow shaken off of them. You could see wind sculpting on the windward features. You could see bare rock where there was snow, right? There's so many ways that even a rank beginner could look up and say, that used to be white and now it's gray because it used to be covered in snow, now it's rock. And then you go from that observation and you ideally accumulate a large number of observations. And hopefully, out of that sort of bucket of observations, you detect a pattern because you're noticing that maybe the trees have all been shook loose of snow, that the ridges are bone dry, that there's wind sculpting. All of those things are all indicative of the same thing. They're all part of a singular pattern, which is nature telling you, hey, 3 days ago, the wind blew really, really hard. And so then you start to take that pattern and you interpret it. You say, what that means is all the snow blew over here, and there's going to be a wind slab over there, and that old persistent weak layer might get woken up, whatever it is. That's interpret. That's ascribing meaning to the observations. And then the last step is, what does that mean for us? Where should we go? And that's the decide part. So instead of starting with that, it's like we should start back with just naked observation of the natural world. And for me, I call it the naturalist mindset. Like
Yeah.
I go back to my friend Ray, who I was telling you about earlier in the conversation. And Ray, amongst many other passions, had a massive passion for birds. He was like an ornithologist. And we'd go into the mountains in February and he'd be like, shh, listen, you hear that? And I'd notice a bird song. And he'd be like, that means spring's coming early because that bird usually isn't singing yet. And I remember one particular day on Taylor Mountain, we used to ski all the time. And he stopped me and he's starting to point out these different bird songs. So he's making observations. I can stop, I can make the same observation. Yeah, I hear it. There's a sound, a bird sound coming from the tree. But then he could ascribe meaning to it. He could say, that
Mm.
means that this is unusual because, you know, and I would miss that. I would have
Yeah.
no ability to make that inference. And that really like started to change my mind about the way I thought about the mountain, especially after he died, because I wanted to carry like his legacy forward, and the things I would learn from him. And that's so much of how I try to approach the mountains now is like to be a biologist almost, a naturalist, somebody who's deeply curious about what the heck is going on out there. What are the
Mm.
mountains trying to say? And then do my best to interpret that. Even if those interpretations are wrong, it's okay because if you're doing enough observing, then the pattern is going to emerge. There's going to be a
Yeah.
pattern. So you can make one or two wrong inferences, but ultimately you'll probably come out with the right understanding if you're tuned in enough, if you're observant enough, if you're curious enough, if you're interested. And that's a way that makes sense for me now. to like go into the mountains. It's a framework that I fall back on over and over again. It's just like delay the decision, immerse yourself in the environment, be a student of it, and then see what it tells you.
Yeah. No, I love that. Yeah, like you hear things, you see things, but what are they? What's the meaning to them? Hearing them, seeing them doesn't really do you a whole lot of good if you don't actually listen, I guess, or interpret their meanings, as you say.
But
And I
it's
think
interesting.
yeah,
I'll jump in there because I think that the biggest problem that backcountry skiers in particular have is not the lack of interpretation, it's the lack of observation. When
mm,
we meet at the car, put the skins on, pop, 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 we're going. Who's actually talking about what they're seeing, what they're feeling? Who's saying, oh, it's weird, the left side of my face is like getting windburned. Oh, maybe that's because the winds have shifted and they're coming out of the east now. And that means the snow is getting transported. But we're not noticing that. We're not tuning into that. We're just like, you know, focus on the objective, focus on what happened yesterday. We're not tuned in enough to the environment. So we're not accumulating the observations that ultimately will lead to better interpretation. Because I think interpreting relies on experience and education, but observing doesn't. Observing just relies on a mindset, on an interest, So I think it's still key to just have that interest and that engagement, even if you're a complete beginner. Like let's say somebody's listening to this podcast, they're an ice climber, they've been following Aaron Mulkey forever, and they're like, how do I become the next Aaron Mulkey? It's like, you're never going to get there unless you're actually looking, noticing, oh, wait, that pillar actually fell down because I'm pretty sure that was hanging on yesterday. I wonder why that fell down. I wonder when it fell down. I wonder what aspect it faces. I wonder if that was driven by warming. I wonder if it got knocked off by an avalanche. You know what I mean? And it's
yeah.
like that, like interest and engagement with the natural world is like the foundation, I think, for being a mountain traveler.
It's interesting that made me really think about times I've been out skiing with people that are I look at as they're the leader, they're the ones with the experience. And a lot of times I think I do turn my head off and like, oh, I'm here, they know what they're doing. Like I can just turn it all off and just freaking ride the coattails. And I have two partners that I've been with. One is really good about talking about, hey, do you see that? Like this is what I'm like, and so it's almost like I'm in the classroom. And then I have another guy that it's more like I'm just there to be with them, but and it's great. Most of the time it works out fine, but I'm not learning anything. He's just kind of like he's leading me into go do these things, but we're not actually having a conversation about it. And I've never thought about it until you've said this. I think when I go climbing, a lot of times I am not the education person. I am probably the leader. I have found myself doing it when I'm like, if it's a younger kid and I'm mentoring somebody, then I
Sure.
think that turns that on for me. But I probably need to do a better job of turning that on, even with partners that I know are less skilled, and be like, hey, do you see that? What does that mean to you? And talking about it, because at the end of the day, like it should be that day out should be more than just, again, like we had talked about the objective, but did you walk from that away from that day and learning some things? And especially when you're going out with somebody that has more skills, I mean, that should be kind of a priority versus just going with somebody because they have the skills to get you up or get you down something. I think everybody, whether you're a skier or climber, could probably do a better job at that. Not probably, definitely can. Yeah,
Yeah, I
I
think
love the
so.
way you put that. So, kind of rounding some things out here a little bit. So, where where are you at today with your risk tolerance? And I don't. I mean, I don't know if you mind saying how old you are now, and like
Sure, sure. Yeah. I'm 47. And uh, I mean, gosh, where am I with my risk tolerance? Such a hard question to answer. And a lot of times I think that what I think is like how I would characterize it is maybe not as accurate as like what do people I go out with? Like that I should ask them. Like, how do you think? Where's my risk tolerance?
yeah,
Because I think even back when, now I look back 10, 15 years ago to when I think I was sort of at the peak of my risk tolerance. If you'd asked me then, I would have said, oh my gosh, I'm very conservative. I'm very measured. I'm very this. And that was all genuine. I really did feel I was going about things that way, but it was ultimately just like the experiences that I'd had given me the confidence that I had. And now, having had that confidence and then been wrong, and then been wrong again, and then known other people who were perhaps mentors or friends, people who I had implicit trust in, seen them be wrong, then be wrong again. That has left me with the confidence that I have now, which is much less, right?
Mm,
So I think like confidence and risk tolerance obviously are like, sisters. They're very intertwined. It's very hard to separate them. But I know for me that like risk is just a huge part of what makes me tick. I just love being in an environment that requires me to be sharp, to be engaged, to be present, to have skills that I can rely on to navigate the environment. That feels like meaningful time to me. So being in the mountains, part of it is just like you're deliberately going into an environment that's uncertain and unstable, and you're trying to apply everything that you know to navigate through them at the right time. And that's just like, I don't know that that'll ever not be satisfying to me. So there's always going to be, for me, this desire for a risk environment.
mm,
Um, but I kind of counterbalance that with what I was saying about risk or about confidence, which is that sense
yeah,
of like, you guys trust me, this is 100% good to go. Like, you're never going to hear me say that. I just don't
yeah,
hardly ever feel that way.
yeah. I feel like for me, it's yeah, I don't make as risky judgments anymore. Like you're always out there. You go outside, you go to the mountains. You're gonna be there's some sort of risk that's there, and now I kind of like choose when am I going to push that edge of that risk a little bit more, and it seems to be it's only maybe 2 or 3 times a year where I might pull that trigger and be like, all right, like everything speaks to me, it's really good, but I still, at the end of the day, understand this is still really risky, and there's certain things I just can't control. And I think in my younger years, I would have just like I would have consistently made those decisions of like, and you might have been incentivized for those things to continue to do that, but um, now I they're much more. I don't know if it's saying calculated. I just don't take them as often. Is
I,
might be the better word to put it.
I love how you put that. That really resonates with me a ton because it's like, people will often ask, like, has your risk tolerance changed? And it's like, maybe that's not as much the right question. It's like, how often are you willing to operate near that like risk tolerance threshold? And for me, that's also what's changed. It's like the frequency is lower. And
Yeah,
part of it, I think, is that we learn, right, through our experiences, that there's a certain part of this game that's literally Russian roulette. It's literally Russian roulette. And what that means is that, like, the mountains don't care how skilled you are, they don't care how experienced you are. Just the best people die, and people who make atrocious decisions, myself included, survive,
yep,
right? And so then you're left with a certain sense of like, there is a part of it that is just a numbers game. So one way I can improve my outcomes is by reducing the number of times that I'm doing things that feel like they're really close to the edge. And I would
yeah,
totally like kind of assign on to that too, Aaron, that like one of the things that's changed is I still want those experiences, but I need fewer of them.
yeah, yeah, yeah. They're tiring. You can't. I just can't put myself. Yeah,
They are tiring, yeah.
yeah.
And I'll say one thing that I love about being older for me is that they last much longer. I
Oh
don't know if
yeah,
you
for
find
sure.
that.
Yeah, they don't. They're when I was younger, yeah, within a couple of days, like I need more. I need
That's
it,
right.
whereas
Yeah,
now it's like, no, that one will last me weeks, if not
that's right.
longer, or, you know, and it'll be
Exactly. I
like, ah, I'm
love
good for the
that.
season. Like that was good. But Aaron, there's 2 more months of ice season. I don't care, man. That was it. That made my season. I'm good. Like I don't need to go there again. Like
Dude, that's what
amazing
I'm saying.
experience. Just don't need to put myself in that situation anymore. And a few years ago, I used to kayak a ton. That was my I used to rock climb. I got really bad tendonitis and I used to kayak in class 5 and first descents was my thing. I actually paddled a ton of Jackson boaters. And my the guy that taught me how to kayak, he was about 60 years old and kayaked over 100 days a year and died on a river, on a class 3 river, easy. He had run it well over 100 times. Came around the corner, there was a tree there, thought he could get over it, couldn't, ended up dying. And that was the moment for me where I don't know. It made me like just question everything I was doing in my life, and it actually, in many ways, I stepped back from kayaking because I was like, okay, like you're not going to live very long if you're going to pursue ice climbing at this level and kayaking at this level. Let's just be honest with ourselves. And like the law of averages, it's going to be your day. One of these days, it's just going to be it. As I think it's Mark Twight that's like, yeah, you've got this bank account with an unknown balance, and you're just kind of like, you're chipping away at it. You just keep, putting the credit card in, and one of these days, there's not going to be enough freaking cash to cover. And I think that was for me when I just had to step back from that. And I kayak a little bit, but not, I just can't do it at that same level. I want to, I really want to, but I'm honest with myself and knowing that I want to live a long time. Like the experience is great, but living a long time and being here for my kid and my wife is way more important than those things. And having that a much more balanced life, I think is what I've also learned in my age is like, yeah, climate's great. It's awesome. But man, there's so many other things I love experiencing. And um, I think that comes with a little bit of age as well. Um,
Yeah.
so what brought you to Samsara Experience? Like where did that come from? Obviously, I feel like it started more of like, well, I'll leave it to you. You kind of take it from there. It seems like it's
Um,
evolved a little bit over the years.
yeah, it's evolved for sure. I think that's fair to say. It started when I was guiding, and I had this client who was a Formula, no, yeah, he was a Formula One racer, and he wanted to do the Grand Traverse. And he's like, "Can you write me a training plan to do the Grand Traverse?" Because I was always talking about training. I was always into training. I've been into training for a long, like I said, since I hired a coach back in my early 20s, and then saw the performance improvements and became aware of how sensitive our body is to the way that we train. So I wrote him a training plan, and that was kind of the beginning of it. And then, I thought so much of my work is helping people achieve these things, right? Because I was guiding. So it was like people show up, they put all this money down, they've taken their precious vacation, they're showing up to do something great in the mountains, and it's my job to try to deliver that to the best of my ability. Then I started realizing like there's so little impact that I have on the outcome if you show up on Friday and we go into the mountains on Saturday. Like we're only there's so many variables that I can't affect in terms of your preparedness. And I've always had this passion. I always enjoyed seeing people achieve things. Like that's always been fun for me. So coaching just became this extension of guiding where it became a way for me to have a much greater impact on people's ability to, you know, live their dreams, achieve the things that they hoped for. And it wasn't just about me like providing security through the mountains, but it was also about me helping to fine tune their body so that they could show up ready. And that was just very, very satisfying. And then from there, I started having athletes and pro athletes who wanted to train. So I started writing training plans for them. And all up until 2020, my guiding career was really my primary focus. And so when I wasn't guiding, I would have this, well, throughout the year, I would have this roster of athletes that I would coach. It was usually about 12 to 14. And I would meet with them one on one every week. We'd have a conversation, we'd modify the training and so on. And it started occurring to me like, I'm having the same conversation over and over again. It doesn't make that much sense. Like, why don't
Hmm.
I find a way to have one conversation with all these people and to allow all these people to have conversations with themselves because they're all doing the same things and struggling with the same challenges and overcoming the same obstacles. And then COVID hit, and I had an accident right before COVID. My accident was like a week before COVID shut the world down. So I came home, I destroyed my shoulder, I injured my back, and I had 4 months where I couldn't even walk, let alone go into the mountains. So that gave me some space to rethink training from scratch. And at that time in the world, training was a one on one experience between a coach and an athlete. And increasingly, that didn't make sense to me. I thought going into the mountains and achieving great things is always been about the partnership and the relationship. So why should training not also have some element of like support and accountability and community to it? And so I was trying to figure out like how do you bring community into the journey of becoming an athlete? The
Hmm.
lifelong journey of evolving, growing, restoring from injury, improving performance, maybe finding a new sport, right? And then pivoting and being like, now I want to get good at surfing. Can I train for that? I want to get good at rock climbing. Can I train for that? But I've got this injury. How do I recover? And I just had 20 years of like studying human physiology and biology and just being fascinated with it. And I wanted to figure out how to make it more of a community thing. And we started the athlete team. And I launched it on Instagram. And I said, hey, I'm going to bring in 30 people. We're going to form this online community. And we will craft training individually for each person. But we'll have this online space where we can stay connected to each other through this journey of evolving as athletes. And it sold out. So I was like, wow, that's cool. Like, this is definitely a need and an interest. And it was COVID time too, right? So, like,
Yeah.
people were feeling isolated. But the reality, I think, for a lot of people is that people in all walks of life want to pursue a life in the mountains. They want to be athletes, but they might not live in a community where everybody else is as focused as they are, even if they live in the mountains. Because most
Yeah.
people who run around the mountains don't really care. They just want to go and, have their day, come home, have a beer, and call it good. But then there's some people who are like, no, I actually want to discover what's the most athletic version of me. And
Yeah.
that's the people that I wanted to really level up. So that's kind of where it started. And it's kind of the real beginning of the new Samsara was 2020 when we started the athlete team and then started hiring people and all that.
Yeah. That's awesome. How many coaches do you have now?
4 coaches.
Four coaches.
Yep. So
And
Ian Quo, who you know
yep.
well and who introduced us, and then Andrew Richardson, who's a ski guide in the Pacific Northwest, and then Sasha Dingle, who's a pro skier, mindfulness coach, and Samsara coach.
Okay. Interesting. Wow. And that's cool. I mean, that's a lot of growth in a very short period of time. So I mean, obviously there was an appetite for what you were putting out there.
Yeah, there was an appetite for it for sure. I think, I personally think that like modern training philosophy is like completely off the rails. I think that what most people are doing, honestly, is just like makes very little sense. It's not backed by science. It's backed by a lot of cultural norms of what we should do that we are all, we all fall into because that's what we see everybody else doing. That's what we're told. And then when you go back and you actually study the physiology of human performance, you're like, that makes no sense.
Hmm.
But everybody's doing that. It makes no sense. So I think
Interesting.
there's an appetite for what we're doing because um, it's just very results driven. It's like either we measure the results in the mountains 100%. Like that's so crucial to who we are. Is that like if you cannot demonstrate that your training transformed your performance as an athlete, you're running longer distances, you're climbing harder grades, then what's the point? It
Hmm.
doesn't matter that you got stronger in the gym. It's so irrelevant.
It's a great way to put that. Yeah. Like your deadlift went up 20%, but what does that actually, how does that connect to your goals that you're actually like where you feel the most fulfilled? I mean, some people feel super fulfilled in the gym and those experiences are really what they're after, maybe more than their goal. But um, yeah, I mean, I have a goal of climbing M11. By the time I turn 50, I've got 2 more years to get there, and um, yeah, it's interesting to think about it that way.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I'm
But
doing the
yeah,
comfortable thing right now. Like I'm not doing any specific plan. It's hard for me during the season, but I'm now starting to think about like, all right, I'm going to the gym. I'm doing some stuff, but I'm doing it really because it's comfortable. It's not probably progressing me. It makes me feel good in my body, but I don't know that anything I'm doing right now is really progressing me in my sport. But I do need to figure that out here over the next month because that's my off season, which is when I do train. So, yeah,
and I think that's you know, I do think that's part of the problem. I think that we have this very boom and bust relationship with training, where it's like
oh, I am
I'm either
100% guilty.
uh-huh, I'm either playing or I'm training. And the reality is, when you study physiology, that doesn't work because
Oh,
there's, it would be like eating once every 3 days and then expecting to perform on day 2 and 3. We're doing that on a macro scale of 12 months and saying, well, I
yeah,
put in this block of training and now 3 months later, I'm supposed to be reaping the rewards of what I did 8 weeks ago. Like, no, we're not. It doesn't, our physiology is the thing with human physiology is that we are so incredibly fine tuned for adaptation. Humans are just so fine tuned from a cellular level to adapt to the stimulus that we put our bodies under. And what part of what that means is that we're also fine tuned to erode the adaptations that we don't demand of our bodies. So when we take weeks off of training, we basically have this, you know, whatever value effect you had from that training is going to erode away because there's enzymes in our body that are specifically dedicated to removing tissue that's not being used because there's a maintenance cost to all of the adaptations that we need, whether it's stronger tendons, higher density bones, more muscular tissue, whatever it is. All of that has a metabolic cost that has to be maintained and kept up by our cellular system that's just at work 24/7, you know, ensuring that our body is hyper adapted to the stress that we put on it. So if we don't maintain that stimulus, we don't keep reminding our body, these are adaptations I need, our body's actively removing them because otherwise it's just too expensive to maintain all of that. So training for me is really like the process of speaking the language of my cells so that I'm telling my cells, this is what I need, therefore this is what you should build.
Hmm. I like that. I mean, it when you explain it that way, it makes sense to me. To not have this on-off switch, and that it's more of consistent. I wanted to say consistent movement. I mean, but consistent training throughout your season. Well, your season is really your life, not a
Your season
specific
is your
time
life.
frame.
Yeah.
And I could see some serious pros to that, and especially in the way that I've been doing it. That I can see how that would make a difference.
My guess is that if we dug into your training, part of the reason that you don't train in season is because it's too fatiguing and you
Yeah.
don't want to rob your performance in the mountains. And that right there is the problem because the training that we've all been told we need, which I think is by and large trash, to be totally frank, is extremely metabolically expensive. It's very fatiguing. So if I was training that way, I wouldn't do it in season either because I wouldn't be able to go out and ski the next day and my
Mm.
performance would be shot. And over the course of like 5 or 6 days of skiing, I'm not going to come back and then do more that robs the bank account that's already, in a deficit. That's, I think, such a big part of the problem is that most people's training looks way too much like their sport and it feels too much like their sport. It's exhausting in all the same way that their sport is exhausting. And from again like a cellular level, when you look at the impact of loading, sport is inherently going to involve rapid loading. Sport happens fast. That's the whole idea of it. And what our training should do, it should be a stimulus to our body to rebuild, where sport ultimately wears us down. Rapid loading is degenerative to a tissue. And given the right time frame, it will repair. But if you're not doing the strength training that gives it the kind of hyperdrive stimulus to repair, you're going to slowly, as you age, just degrade. And so
Hmm.
most people, what they see is that as they get older, their performance declines. But people who train effectively see that as they get older, their performance responds to their training. And insofar as they are training, they're able to maintain a level of performance that's commensurate with their performance 20 years ago. Whereas
Oh,
when you're in your
interesting.
20s, it's easy. You're
Yeah.
basically riding the wave of your biology, which is all
Yeah.
in your favor. And in your 40s, you're not. So in your
Yeah.
40s, you're either training to give your body the specific stimulus that it needs to return to a performance level of a decade or two ago, or you're just performing at the level of your age, and your age is only going against you.
Yeah. 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 I've always heard it like you want to go into your 30s strong, strong, and then you want to go into your 40s stronger than your 30. Like as soon as you let off the pedal of your training or whatever you're trying to do, like it's just going to be that much harder to achieve any previous results. But like your consistency of training your body and good proper training is going to continue to make you stronger. I mean, obviously there's probably maybe when you hit late 40s and 50s, there might be a bit of a balance. I mean, I've always heard it's harder, to gain strength the older you get, and I'm sure there's some theories in that, but maybe in the gym. But is that outside? I don't know. But I don't know that conversation. Just like we could probably talk for another 45 minutes just about that. But I know you got a dead stop at 3:30. Um, I do want to say like this conversation's been awesome, both front and back. One thing that I think is really noticeable, and it comes in this last like 15 minutes. Like one thing I've listening to you on social media and even, seeing you in TGR stuff, like you always come off to me as somebody who had obviously a high level of skill set, but there was a lot of brains behind it. And the last like 10, 15 minutes of conversation, I think really brings that out of like, I think that's what makes you really unique to me is that you're somebody that can go out in the mountains and perform at a high level, but then also understands the science and everything else that's behind that. And I don't know. There's a lot more to you than just the performances that you can put in the mountains, and I think that's really cool. And for me, makes you a very unique individual, which is why I wanted to have you on the podcast too. So
Well, that's super kind. Um, yeah, that's a very kind thing to say for sure. Honestly, for me, when I was in my 20s, I was perpetually injured and I was very weak and I struggled to perform a lot. Like during my supposed athletic prime, I was not a very good athlete at all. And I am so much better athletically now at 47 than I was at 27. It's not even close. So for me, it's like that's why my passion for the science is so off the charts is because it's completely changed my life. It's the
yeah,
only thing that enables me to now in my late 40s like have this career and be able to make plans and have ambitions and project harder routes and maybe run longer, do all those things because I finally feel like I got the keys to my Ferrari. It's like I've
yeah,
had this broken down car in the garage that like every once in a while in fits and spurts does really well, but most of the time it's broken, it's injured, it's got
yeah,
parts missing,
totally,
and
yeah. Like
and now
you figured
figuring
out how
out
to.
how to maintain it
Yeah, that's cool. It's a good way to put
and
it. I
tune
mean,
it.
yeah, it's like you finally figured out how to turn the engine on. You've had the
Yeah,
Ferrari, but you just didn't know how to turn the keys on. I think
yeah,
it brings me to this guy I had on the podcast, Steven. I met him at an ice festival. He weighed 330 pounds or something, so he looked like he stood out at an ice climbing event.
sure,
Um, and over the last 2 years, I think he's down to 200. And he's like, dude,
amazing,
and he's 50, and he's like, dude,
amazing.
I had no idea I had this engine. I had no
Mm,
idea that this body was here. And he's actually, I think he's in the Alps right now in Chamonix, and he's like crushing it. And it's really
amazing,
cool because I've been able to see the transformation of somebody in their late 50s. He knew he was overweight. He knew, but he's like, man, like, holy crap, there was an engine here, and I think that's so cool. So, and I
totally.
don't think too many people realize what they. I mean, as you said in the beginning, like everybody's born with the Ferrari. It's a matter, do you want
Yeah,
to have the tools to turn the engine and switch the key?
yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, that's cool,
Yeah,
man. Well,
that's exactly right. Yeah. I mean maybe at a later date, if that's of interest to your audience, like I'd love to take the deep dive into training because
oh yeah, we
I
got to
think
do
that
it.
there's a lot of broken down Ferraris in garages
Oh, 100%.
in your audience.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm kind of broken right now. I got a partially torn Achilles. Ian's been helping me a little bit with it, but man, it's
I'd love to help you with that. Yeah.
draining me mentally and also physically. You just your confidence, everything. I mean, I'm freaking. I'm ready to be past it, and I'm not moving past it. But yeah, we should definitely connect to dive into the science a little bit. People love that. I did one with Scott Johnson. I think it's still the most listened to podcast that I have. People just eat that stuff up, and it's educational. It's great, and everybody's going to get their little bits and pieces of it. So
Yeah.
Well, I'll kind of wrap it up here. I mean, where so Samsara Experience, is it just samsaraexperience.com that
Yep.
they can find all that on? You guys are on socials as well. And they can find you on social. Um, yeah, anything else you want to add? I mean, obviously, I'm sold to get into Samsara right now and check it out. So,
Let's go. Yeah, no, I mean that's my life's work right now. That's my passion is helping athletes discover the most athletic version of themselves. Strength, mobility, endurance, restoring their bodies, and I'm just loving that work. So if there's athletes out there that are struggling with their performance, they're in this cycle of injury and plateaus and setbacks, reach out, hit me up personally, and let's get a conversation started and see if we can help you because your body is far more capable than you realize.
yeah, awesome. Well said. Well, Sahan, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. And for everybody, if you want Sahan back on, let us know. But I think it's already for sure. So, all right. Thanks.
Awesome, Aaron. Thank you so much.